Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone for joining. We let me just start actually by doing chanting because I'll be sharing the Buddha's words. So Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. Okay, thanks for joining today's session about how to be happier using the Four Noble Truths. And my name is PJ. Maybe I'll just give a very brief introduction about myself. So I've actually been practicing the Dhamma for the past like 15 years or so. I would say that's the start of my actual practice. Prior to that, I was like a lot of people, like a nominal Buddhist, right? But I drank a lot, I partied a lot, conducted a lot of misconduct by body, speech, and mind. Yeah, and what changed was actually going to attend a executive retreat with Ajahn Brahm in 2010. And so I've been practicing now. This will be the 15th year. And in 2022, a bit of my practice. In 2022, I also actually went to spend 3 months with Ajahn Brahm during the Rains Retreat, which was a fantastic experience. And I highly recommend everyone to if you have a chance and the opportunity to take 3 months to spend a Vasa period with a teacher, that would be fantastic. And in 2023, I also actually visited Ajahn Ganha for the first time. So I would actually say that my main teachers would be Ajahn Brahm, Ajahn Ganha, Ajahn Brahmali, and also this German monk called Venerable Analayo, whom I've not met, but I have a lot of his books because he translated the Chinese agamas into English. So I've studied the suttas for the past 10 plus years or so. And I think that in the last Dhamma inspiration session at Puming Si, Sister Billy said that it wasn't her job to overload and dump you with the suttas. And I was thinking to myself mentally that that's not her job, that's my job. So I'll be sharing some suttas today. Yeah, because we're talking about the Four Noble Truths, right? So I think that it's important to go back to what the Buddha actually taught and shared. And so for today's session, we just did a 10 minutes meditation, and that would be maybe a 30-minute download. Hopefully, it will be faster, but we'll see how it goes. And breakouts will be 35 minutes. Then we'll finish with like every breakout group, we'll just do a quick sharing, right, to the larger group. And then we'll do a closing with the dedication of merit. So that will be the agenda for today. Yeah, the download would really be to just share with you like what the Buddha actually said, because I've come to realize that a lot of people don't really understand, they think they know what the Buddha said about the Four Noble Truths, but actually they don't really know, right? So I think that's important to have that base level of understanding for everyone. But before we go into the Four Noble Truths, right, I actually wanted to just make a small digression, right? And that digression is actually about how in the Buddhist tradition, we often talk about right view, right, samadhi. And, the Buddha has also said that with right view, then actually the rest of the Eightfold Path, right, right intention, right speech, right livelihood, action, so on and so forth. We'll cover that later on. The rest of the Eightfold Path actually comes from a right, view. He also said actually that intention, right? Chetana is karma, right? And when you have the intention, which is the because of your right intention, right, then you actually have got the right actions by body, speech, and mind, right? So it is because of this, right, that right view is frequently viewed as so important. Like the Arahants frequently talk about like right view. The Majjhima Nikaya, the Middle Length Sayings, there's actually an entire sutta by Venerable Sariputta, which is entirely about right view, right? And that gives you an indication of like how important that is viewed by the noble ones. Because without the right view, it is impossible for you to have the right intentions when you act by body, speech, and mind. And so actually, if you think about it, right, given the way that it affects you, right, actually right view is maybe more accurately looked at as the right frame, right? A frame in the sense of frameworks, in the sense of like how we use it in business lingo, right? We talk about like framework, but also it's also like a frame in the sense of like an actual frame, right? For example, when you take photography, you talk about the frame of the picture, right? Because that frame actually shapes what you're seeing and what you're not seeing. Right. So right view actually in my mind, right, in modern lingo is actually better termed as the right frame. It's not about what you see, right, but how you see it. Like what chooses the context, right, the container of your view, right? And the Dhamma is basically fundamentally a reframing exercise. And that's actually one of the key takeaways that I would say that we should take from today's session. Um, I came to that conclusion actually from reading this book by Scott Adams, and I know that Scott Adams is quite controversial in certain circles. But I think that what is interesting about me, for me, is actually to read Scott Adams, and I've also read his other book. You can see at the bottom, like How to Feel Like Almost Everything and Still Win Big. And he is in that book, and also in this book, he talks repeatedly about how he's a hypnotist. Right? He actually went for a hypnosis training. And in general, I find it interesting that his predictions, right, have actually been quite spot on, right, about certain things. Like, for example, both this and also the previous election in the US, Scott Adams was actually one of the first few to actually say that Trump is going to win, right, because of what he has said and because of the stickiness of and the way that he has said it. And I think that it might be a surprise to a lot of people, but I was actually surprised when I read this book quite recently, Reframe Your Brain, that Scott Adams' thinking is actually very aligned with how people like Ajahn Brahm see the world as I understand it. And that's probably going to be a big surprise to most people. But let me give an example of that, right? For example, when people talk about like giving feedback, right, a lot of times people actually share about like what people did wrong. And the idea and the thinking that we have is, oh, I give you the feedback so you can actually improve, you can avoid mistakes in the future. And in the book, in the previous book, or in this book, Scott Adams actually says that, you actually shouldn't criticize people because actually, when you criticize people, that doesn't help. People don't really like change like what you think they should do differently, right? But instead, actually, you don't criticize them, but you tell them what they did well so that they're motivated to continue improving. And what's interesting for me when I read that was, wow, I first had heard that from Ajahn Brahm in many, many executive retreats before, where Ajahn Brahm actually said that, it doesn't work for you to criticize people, right? It actually works better when you motivate people, when you tell them, okay, you did this well, right? And I've had many years with Ajahn Brahm for the past 15 years to see that he actually does this in practice. Frequently, he will say, okay, that's fine, but maybe this is better, and you've done this well, and carry on doing this and improve it in this way, right? And over time, I actually think that my personal interpretation of like why Ajahn Brahm and maybe why Scott Adams also views this in the same way is that the mind is actually a little bit like directing your mind is a little bit like riding a bicycle. Right. And what I mean by that is for those of you who can remember what it was like to ride a bicycle when you first started learning how to ride a bicycle, I vividly remember when I was 10 years old at a void deck, being very, very determined to like learn how to ride a bicycle and having many, many scratches. And one thing that I discovered was quite interesting was, when I saw something, right, I can tell myself, don't go there, but where I was looking at, the bicycle will go towards. And the mind works in exactly the same way, right? When you tell yourself, right, oh, I'll look at the mistakes, I'll point to that person's mistakes, you're directing the person's mind right towards the mistakes. That's what they will focus on. And interestingly, I've come to realize from my personal experience applying this exact feedback, right, from Scott Adams and Ajahn Brahm, when you direct people to their weaknesses, they tend to show you that, right? Whereas when you direct them to their strengths and say that this is where you're really, really good at, this is where you're world class at, they tend to show you that in return as well, right? And I think that our minds are exactly the same way to ourselves. When you focus on what you are doing well, actually that's what you tend to actually like reinforce. right? So I think that that's actually maybe the first first takeaway that I would want you all to take away from this session, right? That the Dhamma practice, right, is fundamentally about reframing your view of the world. You're reframing your view of the world, right, to be more aligned with what the Buddha said, what the Buddha actually sees, what the Arahants actually see, right? So you're reframing and teaching yourselves, right, taking the conventional truths, right, and looking at them in a completely different way. And that allows you to actually like ease a lot of your suffering, right? So that's the first takeaway that I hope that you all take away from today's session. But maybe let's move on to like actually what the Buddha taught, right? This is the very first sutta that the Buddha taught. And it was in a deer park in Sarnath in Isipatana, outside the Varanasi. And according to tradition, the Buddha actually taught the first five disciples the Four Noble Truths, right? I'm going to change the order a little bit. So this is taken, the text is taken verbatim, right, from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation of this Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which is the Pali name for this, setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. But I'm going to change the order a little bit, right, so that it doesn't, the meaning of the text doesn't get lost, right? Because unfortunately, Pali is a very repetitive language, so there's a lot of repetition in there, and the essence of the text sometimes gets lost in all the repetition, right? So I'm going to be reading directly from the slides, right? So this is what the Buddha actually said. Bhikkhus, and he's speaking to the first five bhikkhus, but the Four Noble Truths applies to everybody else, right? So bhikkhus, these two extremes should not be followed by one who has gone forth into homelessness, meaning that you have ordained, right? What two? The first one is that you shouldn't put, the pursuit of sensual happiness and sensual pleasures, which is low, vulgar, the way of worldlings, ignoble, unbeneficial. The second one that you shouldn't pursue, right, the extreme, is the pursuit of self-mortification, right, asceticism, which is painful, ignoble, and unbeneficial. Maybe I'll pause here to just highlight that something that Ajahn Brahm shared before, about this, right, which is this pursuit of self-mortification. It is actually Atakila Matano Yoga, which translates literally, right, if you were to unpack that phrase in Pali, into practices which tire out the body, actually. Yeah, tire out the self. Yeah. And so that's actually what this means is actually that, for example, if you sit down and meditate and you force yourself to sit for 2 hours because you're like, oh, I need to sit for 2 hours, right? And after you sit for 2 hours, right, you're completely exhausted. You're pursuing and doing exactly this self-mortification, because you're doing something that literally tires out your body and your mind. Anyway, moving forward, uh, what the Buddha then said, that without veering into either of these two extremes, so you're not indulging into five sense pleasures, you're also not actually like punishing your body such a you're very tired out. The Tathagata, which is what the Buddha always calls himself, the Tathagata has awakened to the middle way, which gives rise to vision, meaning that you see clearly, gives rise to knowledge, right? This leads to peace, to direct knowledge, or actually a better translation might be direct experience, right? Leads to peace, direct experience, and let me just, yeah, to peace, direct experience, and to enlightenment, to Nibbana. So that actually is something that the Buddha actually mentioned. So that the middle path, right, is actually not either of these two. And maybe just a quick side talk about like why not these two extremes, right? Because these two extremes, right, actually reinforce your focus on the five sense world. When you indulge in the five sense pleasures, right, the sensual pleasures, which does not include the pure mental pleasures, what you see, hear, taste, touch, and feel, right? When you indulge in, like the most beautiful thing that you've seen, right? That's actually reinforcing actually that the sense world, right? The five sense world of like what you see, hear, taste, touch, and feel is actually important. But when you go the other extreme, right, of completely depriving yourself, like asceticism, right, that's also actually the same effect, right? And if for anybody who has actually forced yourself to sit, right, and you go, okay, I'll sit and sit through the pain. I'll just ignore the pain. I'll just don't focus on the pain, focus on the breath. Just watch the breath, just watch the breath, just watch the breath. You know what's interesting is actually that you actually tend to focus on the pain. Yeah. And in the same way that when you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to deprive myself of all sensual pleasures. I'm not going to watch any Netflix whatsoever, right? No to Netflix, right? What happens, right? You end up actually thinking, it tends to come up repeatedly, right, in your mind, oh, maybe I should be watching Netflix. Or you start daydreaming about the Netflix shows you used to watch before, right? And that's exactly what this focus on the two extremes tends to do. It reinforces actually the five sense world rather than actually leading away from the five sense world. So that's why actually the Buddha talks about a middle path. Right? It's not either indulgence nor the pure tiring of yourself with all the ascetic practices, but something in between. Uh, okay, how do I delete the annotation? Sorry about that. Still figuring out the all my drawings. Okay, cool. So, what is the middle way awakened to by the Buddha, which gives rise to, to vision and so on and so forth, and leads to Nibbana? It is this eightfold path, which we'll talk about in a bit, right? The eightfold path, right, is the middle way, and that's actually the emphasis for this slide, right? To tell you that actually this whole eightfold path is actually what the Buddha recommended. It's not the sensual pleasures indulgence, it's not the asceticism, but actually the eightfold path. And so let's just talk about like what are the four noble truths, because the eightfold path is the fourth noble truth, right? But let's start first with the first noble truth, right? And this is what the Buddha said. Now this bhikkhus is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, right? The fact that you're born right now, you will suffer, right? So then the question that is often asked, right, is that do arahants suffer? The short answer is yes, because they're born, right? Aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, right? And this is in Chinese, we have that saying of like 生老病死. It's literally birth, aging, illness, death. It's literally in this order, right? But what follows is also really interesting, right, for me to talk about like what is like suffering, right? Union with what is displeasing in suffering, right? So for those guys who have been Singaporean guys who have been to NS, right, and you're being asked to do something that you don't like to do, like go clean the toilets, for example, right? That is your union with what is displeasing, right? Separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Again, for those guys who have been Singaporean guys who have been to NS, right, national service, yeah, when you're being separated away. I still remember when I was in national service on Pulau Tekong, looking out at the planes, right, and all those planes taking off from Changi Airport, flying over the basic military training center, and looking at it and going that, ah, that's what I wish to be on, right? And the separation, right? Yes, you can see it, but you can't. You are not there. That's definitely suffering, right? Not to get what one wants is suffering, right? And that is actually again like very self-evident. And brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging and suffering. The five aggregates, just briefly for explanation, is actually what the Buddha describes as every sentient being. That you've got form, you've got with your form, right? You have your senses, and then your sense experiences, what you see, hear, taste, touch, and feel and cognize your perceptions. So you have the sense of sight, sorry, the sense experiences, right? Meaning that actually you see something, for example, you see something that's beautiful, you see something that's ugly, you see something that's neutral. You smell something that's fragrant, you smell something that's disgusting, you smell something that's all smelly, and you smell something that's neutral, and so on and so forth. Then you also have that sense perception, right? With the senses, you have the perception, and you start seeing that, oh, actually, I perceive a screen, and it's a black screen with like white words, for example. That's the perception. Then you have your will, right? The volition. Oh, actually, this is nice. The feeling is very nice. I perceive this. I want more of it. You generate the will for that. And then the last one is actually the consciousnesses. Each of your six senses, right? Your five senses, see, hear, taste, touch, and feel, together with your sixth sense of the mind, each of these, right, has a separate consciousness, right? So that's something that I won't go into detail because it touches on the concept of non-self, but just to highlight that you're born with your five aggregates here, you're gonna suffer, right? That's what the main point of like this excerpt is saying. But in this same sutta, the Buddha actually talked about how this first noble truth of suffering also has a job to be done, right? And what is that job to be done? This is in a separate part of the same sutta. The Buddha actually said, this noble truth of suffering, right, is to be fully understood, right? And I think Jia Yi will know this because we just spoke about this recently. When you're suffering, right, the point is not for you to distract yourself. It's not to run away. It's not to suppress it. It's not to like, say, oh yeah, 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 okay, whatever it is, right? Is to actually dive deep and to actually really understand, right, your suffering. This is the job to be done when you're suffering. And this is the part where I feel that most people in the Buddhist practitioner community, they don't get this, right? They don't do this. They tend to actually like, oh, suffering, oh, just watch the breath. Oh, just be aware. That's fine. That's not full understanding, actually. So I'll talk later about like how do you then like use the Four Noble Truths itself to actually better fully understand your suffering in a little bit. But let's proceed with the suttas. Uh, the second noble truth, right? The Buddha then says, now this right, bhikkhus, this is the five bhikkhus, but also to everybody else. Sorry, is there any questions? I heard a sound. Wen Sun, do you have anything that you wanted to ask? No, okay. Yeah, no worries. So I'll just proceed with this download first. So now this because it's the noble truth of the origin of suffering. Right. It is this craving which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there. Right. And that is the craving for sensual pleasures. And sensual pleasures refers to the pleasures of the five senses. This is kama tanha, ka long A M A. And that actually refers strictly to the five senses of what you see, hear, taste, touch, and feel, right? The craving or the tanha, the for existence, the craving for and the craving for extermination of vibhava tanha. So meaning that I don't want to exist, I don't want to suffer, I don't want to like live and suffer anymore. That is actually the vibhava tanha, like this craving for extermination right here. Yeah. So I think that maybe an important thing to highlight here is that the translation for craving is actually in maybe I would actually say that the word tanha refers to thirst, right? And the Pali term for thirst. And thirst, right? Actually, if you think about thirst, it actually is a pretty large spectrum, right? It's not just actually well, I'm dying, please give me water, right? But also that, well, I'm a bit thirsty, let me just drink some water, right? And so actually, I think that the word craving here is maybe not as good as the term that Ajahn Brahm tends to use, which is wanting, right? Because wanting actually has that whole spectrum, right? You want is just like, hey, my mouth a bit itchy, can I have a bit of like food, right? To, oh, I'm super hungry, I really want food right now, right? So I think that this is just one thing to highlight here, right? So this is the origin of suffering, right? Why you suffer is because you want something, right? And I think that the thing that people don't real like, going back to like the sutta here, right? Just admit someone. The noble truth of the origin of suffering. So this craving or wanting, right? Actually, what you need to do is to abandon that, right? So that's actually the job to be done for this noble truth, right? And how then do you do so? And that's actually to be found in the third noble truth, right? Where the Buddha said that now this bhikkhus is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the same craving that he spoke about in the second noble truth. You When that subsides, actually that's when your suffering stops, right? And so then he talks about the four ways to give up that craving. You give up, right? Chaga, right? Chaga is the same word used for generosity. Relinquishing, which is patinisaga, and patinisaga is better described as actually to throw away, right? You just throw it away. Right. Freedom, freedom is a good translation for vimutti, right? Literally just to be free from it. And non-reliance, analayo, which is also better, maybe translated as like not letting it stick to your mind, like the Teflon mind, right? And Ajahn Brahm has a talk on YouTube that's got millions of views that it's called The Four Ways of Letting Go. It's talking about this, right? This is exactly how you abandon this craving, right? That's the third noble truth. So the third noble truth, just to recap, first noble truth, you suffer, right? You're supposed to fully understand. right? The second noble truth, you dive deep, right, to understand, okay, like what's the cause of the suffering, right? It's because you want something, right? And that one thing is to be abandoned. How do you abandon that one thing, right? You abandon that one thing by actually, you know, this four ways of letting go. You give up, you throw it away, you are free from it, and then you don't let it stick to your mind, that one thing. And then this third noble truth, right, is the job to be done, right, is for you to fully realize it, right, is to be realized. And then the fourth noble truth, right, the fourth noble truth, the way leading to the cessation, meaning that the way leading to the stopping of the suffering, right, is this noble eightfold path, which is right view, right intention, right speech, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right samadhi. Samadhi is, I didn't translate samadhi because Bhikkhu Bodhi uses like right concentration, but I have checked this with friends. So interestingly enough, the word samadhi is actually still used in Hindi to this day. And I asked my friends, right, okay, when you look at the term like sama samadhi, right, Hindi speaker friends, does the term like is it the same as like concentration, right? Because in my mind, concentration connotes effort. So does samadhi also have the same like effortful meaning, in Hindi? And interestingly, they said no. Right? They're like, no, actually, samadhi doesn't really connote like effort the way that the word concentration does. Right. So I have not translated samadhi. I think that the Chinese term for sama samadhi, right samadhi, actually is a very good one. Like ting means to be like to be not moving, to be still, right, to be settled, right? I think that that's actually probably a better translation than concentration. Yeah. So anyway, this is the Eightfold Path. One comment here, right, is actually that you notice that right view in some parts of the suttas, right view is actually described as the Four Noble Truths, right? Within the Four Noble Truths, the fourth noble truth contains right view, which is the Four Noble Truths itself, right? And it almost sounds like circular logic, but it's actually not a circular logic. It is in computing terms what you call like a recursion, right? Because what actually happens, right, as you progress down the path, maybe you've got some understanding of right view, right? That helps you cultivate the intention, right? That you then act by speech, body, and mind, which is actually the progression, right? Your speech, body, and then the mind. And after you act by speech, body, and mind, right? And then you experience like a bit of like the samadhi, that actually shapes your view again, right? You then go, oh, actually, I can see things, you can frame it more accurately, and then you can see things more clearly, and then actually the cycle goes back again. So that's actually what happens, like in this very recursive way. And it took me a while to actually understand and unpack this, like that the Buddha is really very brilliant, in the way that he has put something into terms, right? Every part of when you first read the suttas, right, it's very, very confusing. It takes a while for you to actually like unpack and to see that actually they're all interlocking and they're all linked to each other in a way, and it goes into this like process, right, like a computer program in many ways. So anyway, this is the Eightfold Path, and it is the way leading to the end of suffering. It's the middle way, right, and it is to be developed, right? This is the job to be done. Yeah, and I think that with the Four Noble Truths, right, I'm just gonna pause here and just like highlight and emphasize, right, that with this, right, the Buddha is really a spiritual genius of all time, really. Because with this, he laid out a work, right, framework, right, for complete happiness. And then what do I mean by that? Right? So conventionally, and if you look at the way that the Four Noble Truths is presented, right? We talk about suffering, right? Its cause, which is the second noble truth, which is one thing. We talk about the third noble truth, like what happens when the cause ceases, and then how do you cease the causes of suffering, right? The path leading to that, right? So people look at this, right? And in Buddhist circles, it's very common that people talk about, oh, the Buddha only taught suffering, right? And its elimination. But they don't realize, right, actually that the third noble truth, right, is actually about complete and utter happiness. Because imagine a world, right, where you can never be frustrated, you can never be sad, you can never be angry, you can never be fearful, you can never be worried about anything, you're never feeling lonely, unsupported, ever. None of those like negative states that you have, right? You will never have that. what's left behind, right, is not an empty void, Actually, what's left behind, right, is actually this immense happiness, right, that is beyond your current imagining. Like, imagine your happiest moment that you've ever experienced in your life multiplied by a million times more. And that's actually what the third noble truth is really about, right? So the four noble truths, right, is really not about suffering, right? The Buddha talked about this, right, because this is the most practical way for people to actually start to act on things, right? But the Four Noble Truths, right, is ultimately really about happiness. And if you were to rearrange the Four Noble Truths, right, actually the Four Noble Truths, right, is really about happiness and its cause, right? The four ways of letting go of the one thing, right? That's actually the happiness and its cause. What happens, right, when the cause of happiness, right, when you don't let go, when you don't, the four ways of letting go, you don't do that, right? What happens, right, is actually that you want and you crave, right? And then that causes you to be unhappy, which is the first noble truth. And actually, how then are you happy, right? It's actually the fourth noble truth. That one actually remains the same. So this is really about this is really what the Four Noble Truths is about, right? And this is the complete framework. Literally, there's nothing extra that needs to be added in, right, for you to be truly happy. And that's why I think that whenever I read about how people talk about, oh, we need to talk about like a mental well-being in the Dhamma, my first thought, honestly speaking, is that you probably don't really understand the Dhamma. Because if you really understand the Four Noble Truths, you realize that this whole practice, right, is about mental well-being. This whole practice is about your happiness, it's about your suffering, and it's all in the mind, actually. Yeah, and if I were to elaborate further, right, about like how happiness is possible, right, what this framework, happiness is possible because you're giving away the causes, right? It's the remainderless fading away and cessation, right? So all the causes for suffering, right, is really all gone. This is the ultimate happiness, right? And because that we crave and want, right, that's why actually that we suffer, right? And that sometimes we are unhappy because we want something, that's why we actually suffer, right? This just a recap of like what I've covered before. And the way to stop that, right, is the middle path, right? This is the way to stop the eightfold path, the wanting and the craving. In multiple parts of the sutras, especially in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected sayings of the Buddha actually emphasizes, right, that this is the only way. Right. I think I need to emphasize here that the Buddha did not say that mindfulness alone is enough, right? MBSR alone is enough. No, the only way, right, is every aspect practicing the eightfold path. It's not the one-fold path, it's the eightfold path. That you have the view, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and samadhi, actually. This is the only way to stop the craving and the wanting. So I think that the second takeaway that I want you all to take away from today's session, right, is actually that the Four Noble Truths, right, it's not just about suffering, right? It's actually really about happiness. And that's actually maybe the first major reframe, right? For today, actually. Yeah, it's not just about like mere suffering, it's really about the ultimate happiness. And I think that I mentioned earlier about this before, like it's a little bit like a mind job, right? But embedded within the Four Noble Truths, right, actually is the own recursive means, right, for you to actually do its own job to be done. Okay, it's a bit of a mouthful. What do I mean by that, right, is that you can use the Four Noble Truths, right, itself, right, to actually fulfill its own job to be done. Yeah. Um, and maybe let's give an example, right? So for example, right, I'm really suffering because I want a job which I didn't get. Right? I'm really sad I didn't get my job in EDB, for example. For background context, I used to be from EDB, okay? Yeah, so I'm just giving this as a hypothetical example. Right. So suppose I'm really, really sad. I'm crying. I'm like, oh my God, this is so bad. I just want to distract myself. I'm like on the couch, unemployed on the couch watching Netflix all day, right? And YouTube. And I just want to do something else, right? I don't want to stay with the suffering because that feeling is just so overpowering, right? Oh my God, I can't stand this. But suppose I realize, right, I got that little bit of wisdom to realize that actually I'm suffering. The job to be done, right, is that the Buddha said is that I should fully understand suffering. So I know that maybe I shouldn't be like sitting on the couch the whole time, right? So how do I do so, right? And I do so, right, by applying my understanding of the second noble truth, right? I can see that, okay, I'm suffering. Suffering does exist. But I also know a little bit of the Dhamma to know that, okay, suffering is caused by one thing, right? I crave and want something, and that's the root cause of my suffering, right? So then, right, this is the other takeaway, right, that I want you all to take away. With this understanding that the second noble truth that suffering is caused by one thing, I can then ask myself in that situation where I don't get what I want, right? I can turn to myself and go, okay, actually in this situation, I ask myself the question, what do I really want? Right? Because I'm trying to fully understand my suffering, right? I'm suffering. It's like, oh my God, I didn't get a job. Superficially, right? It might be that, oh, I think that that's, I didn't get a job, that's why I suffer, right? But I think that maybe what's important here to highlight, right, is that you probably shouldn't accept the first response that comes to your mind when you read this question, when you ask yourself this question, right? You shouldn't just go, "Ah, I didn't get my job lah. Of course, that's why I suffer." Right? If you were to just let yourself sit with this for a while, right, frequently you will actually start to go deeper into the subconscious part of the mind, the part of the mind, right, underlying your thoughts, right, that actually is causing the suffering. And if I were to give a tip here, right, I would actually recommend that you maybe go for a walk or ask yourself the question 3 times mentally, like, so what do I really want in this situation? What do I really want in this situation? What do I really want in this situation? Right? And then you just throw it aside. Just do something else. You have to give yourself, the more you start to mentally think about it, it's as though that you're like muddying the waters. You're not allowing the water that is your mind, right, to actually still so that you can actually see deeper into your own mind. Allow the answer to actually come up by itself. So ask yourself this question 3 times, then go do something else. Frequently, actually, I get insights of this nature when I go exercise, especially like long cardio. Uh, Also when I meditate, sometimes actually it'll pop up, oh, actually this is what I really want. And I'll share a story also like how this actually really helped me. Actually, maybe I'll move on to the next one afterwards. Yeah, I'll share my story after I've shared the next thing. So again, back to, let me just delete this. Yeah, again, uh, back to, this point, right, that I was going to say that the Four Noble Truths allows you to understand, to fulfill the job to be done, right? Okay, the job to be done to fully understand, right? You can look at the second noble truth and then you can ask yourself this question, right? After you ask yourself this question, right, and after you've allowed the answer to bubble up from your mind, to bubble up, and then you go, oh, actually, this is what I really want. This is why I really want the job, right? uh, you can then actually use the third noble truth, right? Because you remember the third noble truth, you have the 4 ways of letting go. You give, you throw away, you are free from it, you don't let it stick to your mind, right? So you can then, now that you've already identified, what you really want in that situation, you can then ask yourself the follow-up question, how can I let go of my wanting and craving, right? How can I let go of what is it that I want and I crave by these 4 ways of letting go? And so, when you're in my experience, my personal experience, the hard part, right, is actually this one, right? Of how do you actually figure out what you really want? Because frequently when you actually giving a job example, for example, I've been unemployed twice before, laid off twice before. So I actually know firsthand like what it feels like. If I were to put a finger to it, right, like what is it that I really wanted? What I really wanted was to not feel like I was not wanted by somebody, to stop the feeling of like being worthless, to stop the feeling of that you are of no value to anybody, right? And so what I really wanted, right, was actually, and then also like, things like money and stuff like that, which is relatively more superficial. But if I were to put a finger to it, right, the 2 times I felt unemployed, and then I felt that feeling of like strong unhappiness when I got a rejection letter, if you even get a rejection letter in the first place, was this sense of like not wanting to feel like this, not wanting to feel not wanted, and to not I wanted to stop feeling like not wanted. I wanted to stop feeling like I was worthless. Yeah. So this is actually yeah, I mean an example of like something like that is really, really hard. But the once you actually get to that level of understanding, right, you know actually that what is it that you actually really want, you can then actually ask yourself this follow-up question: how can I let go of that? Right, by applying the four ways of letting go. In my case of that, I was unemployed. I didn't use this because I was still, this was pre me meeting Ajahn Brahm and me still very, in the worldly conditions and situations, context, right? But if I were to be unemployed again, I think that, I don't think I would feel the same way, because I think that my confidence in the Dhamma is a lot stronger now. B, I think that if I were to go back in time and like ask myself how I can let go, I would actually, it would be a lot easier because I go, okay, now you know that this is the thing that's causing you, right? It's easier, it's almost as though that you got a target, right? You know how to act on it already, right? To let go, give, throw away, not let it stick to your mind, right? In this particular case, right, it might be to actually focus on doing something else, right? Maybe to do some acts of good, right? If I were to go back to give myself advice, it would be like, okay, maybe you want to feel worthy of something, right? Do something that makes you feel worthy, right? Don't let that feeling of worthlessness stick to your mind, right? It's just a job. The job has nothing to do with like you, right? Go do volunteer work, go do something that makes you feel worthy of yourself, right? So in that sense, that allows you to be free of that feeling. So that's actually how it's about applying wisdom, in this case, right? Using that noble truth, right? So I think that just to recap, you can better fully understand your suffering by asking yourself, what do I really want? Then actually applying the second noble truth, and then you can actually apply the third noble truth, right? How can you let go using the four ways of letting go? And this, using these two of the four noble truths, right, actually can solve many, many, many of your problems. I would be the first to admit that I use this repeatedly for my personal problems, and this is maybe where I can share the last time that actually happened. I shared this with Jia Yi when we caught up like earlier this week. I had this situation where I actually started losing my temper at my mom. Right, I lost my temper at my mom a few months ago, I would say. And the downside of having a partner who is also, goes on retreats with you and listens to the Dhamma and listens when you listen to Dhamma talks is that it's both a good side and a downside. The good side is that she's like a human mirror. And the bad side is that she's a human mirror, right? So she came up to me and she said that you're raising your voice at your mom. And then at first I was like, no, I wasn't. I was just like, trying to emphasize like something to her. Then she's like, no, you were raising your voice at your mom. That's not very nice. And then I was like, okay, I think actually maybe she's right. Then she said, what is it that you want? Yeah, you clearly are suffering. So what is it that you want? And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is such a question, right? And it took me a while. I had to pause and I think for a while, and then I was like, oh, actually, it took me a while to realize that actually I wanted my mother to be somebody that she wasn't, right? I wanted her to be someone that she was. She used to be very savvy, very, very smart, very, very thing, like of like all kinds of things. But as she gets older, she's slowing down. Things are not so easy for her to comprehend, and so on and so forth. And I realized, oh, that's actually what I really want. Right. And that actually then allowed me to let go of that because I was like, okay, I have that expectation of her. I can very quickly let go of that. Yeah. So that's my personal situation. Okay, I got a question from Winston. Thanks for that. Thanks, PJ. How do you balance that with job motivation or pursue your career aspirations? I think, Winston, that what I will do is to let you ask that question and to try to apply this when you are having your breakout discussions. And again, just to recap, right? You don't answer the question with of like, what do I really want, right? With your first reaction that comes up. Yeah. So you just let it sit for a while. Actually, ask us maybe a follow-up question for you, right? Is what do you really want from your job? Right. Yeah, so I think Winston, that would be my reply to you is to ask yourself, right, applying this, what do I really want in this situation, right? You say, how do you balance that with your job motivation versus like, or pursue your career aspirations? What do you really want from your job, right? Do you really know what you want from your job? Or is it that actually right now that you're speaking from your conditioning, right, where the whole society is telling you that having a job is very important, get a high paying, prestigious job, because that's the most important thing you can do with your degree, right? Is that really what you want? Right. I think that's maybe a question for you to practice later during the breakouts. Yeah, but thanks for the question. Okay, this is taking more than half an hour. Sorry, I speak a lot. I shall try to move on if I can find my cursor. What is wrong with my computer? I can't see my cursor. Okay. Right, perfect. So now we're going to move on to breakout rooms. We have 17 people on the call. So I am going to break you all out into groups of fours with one group of five, if that is okay. And for the next 35 minutes, so maybe just take like 5 minutes, right, for each one of you to just so the sequence in your breakout groups, right, is that you just take 5 minutes, right? I will shout out to the main room, right? So now's the time for individual introduction. So just take 1 minute each to just introduce yourself, right? Then individually, right, just reflect for 5 minutes on a problem that's bugging you, right? Something that is bothering you, something that's causing you to suffer, right? And then take 5 minutes per person, right, to share your problem and also how you applied the two questions to your problem. Like the question of like, what do I really want, right? And then after if you have identified what you really want, like how could you let go? So I think that the thing I should emphasize here is that I'm not expecting you all to have that complete solution. And you should not expect that actually after this breakout that, oh, actually I have a complete solution. The answer to this question in particular, right, is more for you to share and for people to respond so that you have more ideas and perspectives. But I would recommend really that after this call, right, that you actually really take time to really reflect on this, right? Uh, and then only when you are sure, when you have that insight, that aha moment, right, you're clear that, okay, this is actually what I really want in that situation, then and only then that you actually, you know, ask yourself the follow-up question. This is more of a practice and more for you to practice hearing and giving perspectives and brainstorming like your individual understanding of like your answers to these two questions. Ken, any questions at this point in time about the breakout sessions? You can unmute and ask the questions or any questions about what I covered before if before we go into the breakouts. Okay, I got it all good from Jai, thank you. Ready. Oh, okay, we're on. Okay, so Joey Chow, is this Jillian? Yeah. Uh, can you unmute and explain more about what you mean by, can you explain more on right view?
Yeah, it's me, Rather BJ Jillian.
Hello, yes, yes.
So I'm just wondering, like, what view is it just white thoughts, or positive thinking, or is it
No,
more than that?
no, no. So right view, so maybe I missed it earlier in the session, right? So right view is frequently defined in the suttas, right, as actually the Four Noble Truths. And so
Mm,
the right view, right, is actually not so much about like positive thoughts and stuff like that. It's actually about how are you framing the situation? Are you looking at it in the right frame?
mm.
Yeah. And so when you look at the right frame, right, meaning that you have the right underlying assumptions for things, right, that's actually the right view, lah. Yeah. And I think that in the context of our Dhamma practice is really about looking at the situation, right, with the Four Noble Truths and their jobs to be done. So going back to the jobs to be done, right? So this is where maybe it's not so good. So the first noble truth of suffering, you should actually fully understand it, right? Then the second noble truth, right, that you're the one thing that you should actually let go of it and abandon. Uh, then the third noble truth is to be realized, and then the fourth noble truth is to be developed.
Okay. So
Yeah.
right view basically is look at framing the situation using the Four Noble Truth.
Yes, is to actually understand the Four Noble Truths and to use that as a lens, right, to see your suffering.
Mm, okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for the question. Okay, apologies, Brother Mingwei. Okay, no worries, no worries, not an issue at all. So let me just go back to my slide. I shall, okay, let me just create. So there are, okay, Brother Mingwei, you're in luck. Your group has got 5 people. So there are 2 groups of 5 and then a third group with 4 persons. So I shall open up the breakout rooms now. And I shall stop the recording.